Well, thanks everybody for joining. Welcome to today's CineLink Talks panel hosted by Sarajevo Film Festival, Documentary Campus, and Screen International. I am Paula Vaccaro, and this is CineLink Talks. And CineLink Talks is a program of 11 webinars for the festival's 2020 industry strand running from August. It's been running from August 15th to August the 20th, and it was moved online, of course, because of COVID. I have curated and I'll be moderating some of these talks, and this talk today will last around 1 hour, and we will leave around 20 minutes for questions from the audience. So please make this talk also yours by leaving the questions on the Q&A box, and I will try to go through them through as many as possible. So today's talk is a talk about anti-racism and white supremacy. And I think it's a really important talk about if the market will ever catch up with the much needed change. And it's a talk around, probably around the European side of things, although of course we are gonna have various points of view. And I am interested in knowing if we think that Europe can catch up and actually face real diversity, and how we can push to dismantle Europe's mainly white and mainly male stance. So in this panel, we are talking definitely with an anti-racist POV, and we're going to tackle questions about inherent racism and the challenges that we have ahead of us. I'm very happy to have Nada Rihad, and she's a film director, a producer. She's based in Cairo, Egypt, and her feature documentary Happily Ever After premiered at IDFA, and her short film was selected in Cannes last year. She has designed filmmaking workshops to empower distressed communities suffering from war, displacement, and difficult living conditions in Lebanon and Jordan and in Egypt. And she co-founded the Cairo-based production company Feluca Films, which aims to help filmmakers from the MENA region to explore and shape their own personal voices by producing unique and original fiction and documentary films. We welcome. We also have Sarah Ty Black. Sarah is a film programmer, an arts curator, and a writer from Toronto, Ontario. And she's also one of the directors of the Royal Cinema, where she programs Black Gold, a monthly screening series dedicated to Blackness on screen and off screen. And Sarah has previously held the role of programmer at Images Festival and worked as part of TIFF's festival programming team. And her writing has been published in numerous outlets, including The Globe and Mail and CinemaScope and Movie Notebook. And she has spoken about arts and culture in films and moving image arts in their many forms as a guest of the National Gallery of Canada and the Walrus, as well as with platforms such as Canadian Art and Huffington Post. Welcome, Sarah. From Russia, we have Maria Magdalena Tunkara. Maria Magdalena is a feminist and an anti-racist activist, and in her blogs across multiple platforms, she raises topics of gender, race, and class inequality. So, with all of you, when I was trying to prepare for this panel, I went through some of the most seen shows in Europe, trying to find a bit of a pattern to share with you so we could reflect on some of these things. And of course, some of these things became very obvious, right? I looked at shows like Babylon Berlin and Money Heist and Gomorrah and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And not only, I found only 2 females, of course, all the rest were done by male. Most of the shows were done by 3 white males, 1 white male, all white male. And it made me think, these are the most seen shows, by the way, in Europe these days. We are truly far. And yet, we hear that anti-racism or the talks of Black Lives Matters is an American subject. We hear it a lot in Europe, and we hear conversations around diversity being placed in terms of nationalities, right? When we have diversity is when we have several people from different countries. So oh, Matthias, I think I forgot to introduce you. I just realized, didn't I? Oh, I think I just jumped from your biography. Well, and we have Matthias Wouternol, who is the director of the European film market, right? Let's leave it at that right now, and a really big career, and soon moving into a new position next year in the European Film Academy. Is that correct? So with all this ideas about anti-racism doesn't happen it's not about Europe, it's about the US. I was interested first in looking at what Maria's situation was, because Maria, of course, is in Russia, and it's especially a place where denying that there was ever a racism situation has been her biggest conundrum. And I wanted to ask you, Maria, what was your position when you started receiving so much abuse about your content, and with so many people denying that this was a situation happening in Russia?
Да, несколько, какова была твоя позиция по поводу? Как ты стал получать все эти угрозы?
Ну, моя позиция была, несмотря ни на что, продолжать говорить об этом.
So when Masha started receiving all these messages with abuse and stuff like that, she wanted to continue speaking about problems which she mentioned. Yeah. So she didn't want to stop talking about that.
Потому что в России есть такая специфика, что даже один из главных оппозиционеров страны был националистом.
Because there is such situation in Russia when one of main opposition leaders in Russia used to be a nationalist.
И поэтому я посчитала, что мне нужно озвучивать эти факты, но об этом не нужно молчать, и я считаю, что нужно говорить о расизме и национализме в России.
That's why she decided that it is needed to talk about these problems, and to mention them.
И, в принципе, меня стали вот как-то попрекать в первую очередь именно тем, что я озвучила какое-то нехорошее прошлое, например, главы Роскосмоса и вот Навального.
Yeah, well, and most parts of messages, I mean, first messages when Masha started talking about these problems was about this opposition leader, which she mentioned, and also about the head of Roscosmos Corporation. Yeah, because he also used to participate in nationalistic groups.
Можешь про Твиттер рассказать, что даже в Твиттере сохранились его Твиттер дали Роскосмосу, и там остались российские высказывания.
Yeah, and also now you can see racist messages from the head of Roscosmos in Twitter. Yeah, because
не главы самого Роскосмоса.
Yes,
Да.
Yeah. Yeah, but the Twitter was transformed to Roscosmos Twitter. So now there are racist messages from Roscosmos Corporation in Twitter.
Okay. So it really pairs this idea of racism and nationalistic ideas, correct? Just to boil it down. There was a bit of sound, background sound.
Фактически это одно и то же.
Yes, it's kind of similar in Russia. Yeah.
Okay. So to bring it back again to this original idea, exactly. So we have a situation in a country that highly denies the possibility of having racism applied to younger creators, like it's the case of yourself, expressed together with ideas of nationalism. And I think that in the case of Europe, when we talk about diversity and we talk about of national diversities coming together and creating diversity by doing that, we absolutely oversee the possibilities of anti-racism in entering the conversation. Matthias, I wanted to bring you regarding Europe, because we were talking about this idea of diversity as different nationalities, right? And nationalism and racism coming together. Do you think that, where are we in European terms, market-wise, or in European terms in cinema, that you can see from your position?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, you know, it depends a bit on who you ask, but since you're asking me, and I've been like delving a little bit into it in the past couple of months and years, when it comes to diversity, I think many people have put diversity on the agenda. You see it coming back in, you know, the schemes of national film funds. People are aware and understand in the meantime what it means to talk about having gender equality programs that have been pretty big in Europe, but also the inclusion of what we call minorities in society, even though sometimes they are not really minorities, but let's say minorities in society, indigenous filmmakers, Black filmmakers, people of color working in the film industry. People become aware that even though it might sound weird, as people exist in the industry and actually need support more sometimes than white film professionals. So that part is on the agenda. But when it comes to, I think, the realization or the awareness of how much it is part of a system within Europe in which these people are not supported or actually not even seen, or people are not aware of their existence, and the need for, I think, a change in the system that we have. I think there we're like below zero level in some cases. I think in many countries and many industries and many people will say there is no racism in the film industry. And I think that's not true. And that's, I think, a truth that needs to be explained. We need time for that. But I think those topics are like, yeah, they can be answered in very different ways, sadly. And I think there's a lot of work to do.
Yes, many times we have white men and women, unfortunately, as well, saying that Europe is not racist, and those who explain it are those, of course, part of the Stasi. It's part of the system that doesn't change. Nada, how does this resonate with you, coming from Egypt, but also working in Europe yourself? You're muted.
Or I think for me, like, this is something that I have to deal with on daily basis and in the future planning of our productions in general. For me, there are two layers to the situation. One is actually my own reality and the industry in my region and how far it is misogynistic, and in general, nobody actually acknowledges that either. And on that level, it's quite actually hard to get people to listen to the fact that the film industry in Egypt or in the MENA region is not, it's not a place where there is gender equality or there is no racism. Actually, it is quite the opposite. And when it comes to that, it's kind of hard to get people to listen because there aren't really any transparency when it comes to data sharing with people working in the industry in general. So I think it's quite hard for all the production companies and the festivals to actually collect the data about film production and distribution to begin with. I'm going to give an example. For instance, one of the very few reports on like film distribution in Egypt in 2018 actually had that sentence that there were 37 feature films released in cinemas, and out of them only 0 female directors and only 2 female producers. So that is a huge gap, but in general, it's quite hard to collect the data, and if no one is collecting the data or analyzing it from a gender perspective, it's very hard to convince an industry that there is an extreme problem. I think like co-producing with Europe or having Europe as a potential distribution market is great, but I also think that like the conversation around diversity is starting, which is great, which is really good, but I can sense a lack of awareness of how much unawareness there is of different realities. Like it is very hard for me, for instance, to co-produce with someone who does not think they need to do their homework about the production reality in my own country, and about gender when it comes to Egypt, or about sensitive topics about racism or refugees when it comes to distribution in this region. I don't want to talk too much, so maybe I can get back.
Thank you. It's not too much. It's good. It's good to hear you. And while I was hearing you, I was thinking, Sarah, you receive a lot of the films that are made all over the world. As a programmer, you're probably really looking at creators, Black creators, the things that are produced. And I was really curious, how much do you receive of those Black creators from Europe? You know, do you sense a lack of the amount of films that you can program in your programs? Can you talk a bit about what you sense from your position?
Sure. I mean, right now I'm not doing a lot of programming at all, but in my previous roles as programmer for festivals that were supposedly international, you know, it's hard enough to fight the ways in which whiteness reinscribes itself within our submissions from North America, let alone Europe. So I really, in my own work independently, which focuses a lot mostly on Black lives on screen, I really haven't seen a lot, and I think a lot of that is due to the fact that the way in which our experiences and our knowledge reproduce ourselves and kind of what we know or what we're even able to know. So it's, you know, I think especially in terms of like institutional awareness, there's a real lack there, because I think it's become clear in the ways in which a lot of racialized voices are getting louder about kind of the harm and struggles they've endured in these institutions, that this work can't just be done by one person. And a lot of times that is the case of the matter, one person being like, I don't see this, so let me find it. But it's not really a sustainable kind of work. It really needs to be institutionally mandated and trained and things like that. So while I don't see a lot of submissions coming from racialized Europeans, I also know that a lot of it is because of the way that the institutions I was working for kind of reproduce that, and who even feels welcomed in the first place to apply, you know, who would feel there is a safe home for them and their work there. So.
Absolutely. I do think it starts with the gatekeepers, starts with those who hold power. It starts with those who decide what to fund. And definitely that idea of this work is not for us, this space is not for us, it's informing a lot of the way the world is going. I am very aware about how racism also is not only broadcasted and spread through film, and in Europe, as we call it sometimes, the mother of the dough, right? It's extremely, it's curious how in Europe we hear so many times that this is not our problem. And when we actually are the mother of the dough, right? Europe is the mother of the problem, right? The mother of how all this trauma was started from Europe in a way into, you know, the stories of race and how race was created, that has so many European voices and that are still upheld. And I was thinking as well, Matthias, when you were talking about depends on who talks, from your position of power in the European, the FM, and now moving forward eventually to the European Film Academy, what are the hurdles and the tribulations that you're going through, or are you trying to do something from the place of power that you hold?
Yeah, I think, you know, I must state first of all that I'm somebody who is just in the process of actually becoming aware and learning myself as a white man, to actually start seeing around me how much of the world in which we work and live is basically evolving around white people being the gatekeepers, also mainly in the film industry, and most of them also male people. And I think, being in the process and like talking to people around this subject, watching films, reading about it, I started noticing in the past couple of months, and so years, also of course related to things that happen outside of the film world, but in the real world, that we need to educate ourselves about this. We need to start talking about this as we do in a panel like this. And I think this is not only between people who each from their own perspective has to deal with racism in their own lives, but I think when it comes to gatekeepers or people in charge of film funds, film organizations, promotion bodies, film markets like myself, I think first of all, it starts with understanding what we're actually talking about and admitting that, yes, Europe has a large role to play and has played, as you said, a key role in keeping this system the way it is and actually initiating it in many ways. So that is one thing, because many people don't, I think, even understand that yet. And I think that's okay to admit that you don't understand yet, as I did a couple of months and years ago. But then at least do the work and start thinking about like what actually is the truth in that. So that is, I think, something to start with, because I think if we do understand and do realize that the happy world we live in, that we call the film world, that is working until last year quite well with ups and downs, now of course in a big trouble, we actually have a chance to also right now see and say, listen, we'd like to change a few things and make sure that racist structures as they exist, meaning making white people just benefit way more easily from everything that we've built up in the European industry. International industry is linked in many ways to the European industry. To have that change and to take the responsibility as people in charge as well. And it means that we should start talking to each other. I think we should help each other in saying, listen, this and this could be done differently. And then also as a group, I think, see how we can maybe set up aims of things we'd like to reach and change. And I think as a group, that's always easier to like create an effect as well. That won't be done in 1 year. Probably will need 5 or 10 years for it to really see the effects of those changes. But I think we should start with it. And there is like first talks actually happening between a number of European organizations at the very moment. And I hope they will continue to see how in the next couple of years we can put this more on the agenda, the way diversity has been put on the agenda in the past couple of years.
Maria, do you see things changing yourself in the last few months, or do you think it's been getting worse in Russia for people of color and for Black people like yourself? You're muted. Yes, thank you.
Я вижу, что люди начинают говорить, в принципе, про расизм, хотя эта проблема раньше отрицалась в России, в принципе.
So in the last several months, people have started talking about racism, and that's great because before that, this problem had been silenced in our society, in Russia.
И, в принципе, любой мой пост по тематике расизма воспринимался негативно, и меня обвиняли в каких-то попытках набрать популярность, вызвать жалость и просто придумать себе проблемы.
And every Masha's post before this situation, and every Masha's post before these situations was treated negatively by people. They said that it is just for hype, and this is just your imagination problems, and that this problem doesn't exist. So most parts of comments used to be like that.
И, в принципе, эта проблема никогда не воспринималась всерьез, то есть на каких-то феминистских фестивалях практически не говорили о тематике расового неравенства, хотя обычно интерсекциональные феминистки говорят об этом в других странах.
And this problem wasn't treated seriously also in a feminist society. It wasn't discussed on, for example, feminist festivals, despite, I mean, in Russia, despite that intersectional feminism is also about racism, yeah.
But not in Russia.
Yeah.
So there is a bit of change in the audiences that follow your content and follow you as a creator.
Я рада, что люди начали говорить про расизм, даже если это такой ценой, как
То есть
травля меня.
есть какое-то изменение, что
Да.
в тех людей, которые на тебя подписаны?
Да, они стали воспринимать меня более серьезно.
Yeah, people started, I don't know, thinking about Masha's posts more seriously, and also now there are more followers after that, and there is a less negative attitudes in comments from new followers and from old followers, yeah.
Просто на русском языке практически нет информации про расизм, и поэтому это, в принципе, довольно сложно изучать. Ну, толковую информацию про расизм.
Also, there is a little information about racism on Russian language. So, yeah, it's hard to find any information, I mean, for people who follow Mash, for example, yeah. I guess it's the only way is to look in Masha's blog, yeah.
Thank you. And what about for you, Nada? Have you seen changes recently happening in the MENA region that tell you that there is just some change going on, at least in the conversations or in the effects that you see as a creator yourself and a producer?
I think it's a little bit tricky to answer that question given the entire COVID situation, because everything is so uncertain and on hold in a way. I think in the beginning of this year, I was already having conversations with a few Arab directors and producers who wanted to discuss the possibility of creating a feminist network in the MENA film industry. So that was like for me a great idea and a great step towards like sharing perspectives and figuring out how to make this this problem come to light and how to deal with it in general. But I think everything was put in a bit on hold since everyone is not certain about how they would deal with the economic situation worldwide. So I don't know that in that perspective I can really answer the question very honestly. I think there are waves, people are starting to listen, but I think the people who are starting to talk and listen are people who are mostly producers and directors and not film festival directors or people within the industry itself.
You mean the gatekeepers, right? Those who hold power to tell us where those films can go or where those shows can go. And Sarah, yourself seeing things from let's say the other side of the ocean, how real is this change in the film industry from your perception?
I think there's some learning happening, which is always good, but at the same time, I'm remiss to give any praise to this current moment, because this current moment of learning about racism, and specifically right now in North America, anti-Black racism after June, it's happened time and time again. This is just a part of how that has been happening. You know, there's an archive of this history of it reappearing and repeating itself over and over again. And even listening to Maria speak, it really struck me that in North America, it's like, we're not going to get a tweet from our president saying they don't believe in racism, or, you know, we're not going to get companies calling us out. We have the educational materials, we have the people organizing, and there's still not people listening. So at the end of the day, that kind of points to people wanting to stay in control, in power, or maintain whatever benefits they receive from whiteness, even if they themselves aren't white. So I think, if anything, what we've seen, not just now, but through history, is that it's always going to be the folks who are the most marginalized, the most oppressed, the people on the ground doing the work. Otherwise, a lot of it, especially right now in Canada and the US, a lot of it makes me wonder, is it activism or is it PR work? You know, because this is also really tied in a lot with Black, Indigenous, and people of color calling out institutions. So it's kind of like they've been placed to this position that's aligned with the June uprisings, and it's, you know, that's just something I return to. Is it activism or is it PR work? Because if it was activism, we would see a lot more people in power leaving their roles, redistributing resources and such, rather than this kind of idea of rehabilitation. You know, I always think, whose expense does this rehabilitation come with? How many people have left this job while this one person or this group of people or this entire institution continues to benefit from whiteness and white supremacy in the institution? So yeah, I'm hesitant to praise it, because I know that it's just part of a long history of things like this coming to a head, maybe not exactly the same in different iterations, but with the same kind of the same roots.
Yes, I think the system has so many security and controlled measures on itself. It's almost like a made of a substance that opens up and then tries to go back to its original form all the time.
Exactly. It's I don't know if anyone has seen in North America, the context following the June uprisings of the killing of George Floyd has been a lot of white people taking on this learning. And in the past month or so, once the kind of first wave of learning was over, there was kind of an outpouring of bookstores being like, white people haven't picked up their books to learn about anti-racism. So it's like, I don't have a lot of faith if people can't even go pick up their book, you know, accessibility aside.
I remember that, absolutely. I remember that, that moment of you ordered the books and you never picked them up. It was disheartening, absolutely. And I think that when Nada was talking about data, for example, devil is absolutely in the details. And you just have to really dig in the details of not only the numbers. Anna Cerner has told so many times about gender count, right? And when it comes to BIPOC creators, sometimes it's not even, I mean, they can't access those spaces, they can't have the resources, the whiteness centers permanently and keeps centers back. So it sort of like perpetuates ideas of whiteness as the hierarchy, right? Of the what's talent, what's success. We were talking about this both in the panel that we did on distribution and also yesterday with Vina Sood. There was something really interesting that she said that stayed with me, and she said, let's stop talking about you know, diversity, and let's start talking about accountability. You know, how can we hold the system accountable about race, about, of course, gender, but gender needs to be intersectional. Feminism needs to be intersectional. If it's not intersectional, it's just white centering, this time on gender. And it makes me think, how can we make a whole industry accountable? And when it comes to, you know, cinema, when it comes to TV, everybody needs to come in and really believe that accountability is the way forward. Well, Sarah, I'm interested in your reflection on this.
I mean, people can pick up their books for stuff in the store. That's the first step. And I think a couple years ago, I had a colleague at TIFF who was kind of like, I don't know, it was a weird moment. And he kind of just came up to me and he was like, what can I do to support you? I don't know. And we're not, by we, I mean Black people, we're not often in this position where white people aren't being defensive, white people aren't pretending like they know something that they don't, or, you know, the kind of white ego that takes over and tells you, and this ego exists for everyone, but the white ego is particularly harmful. and that it tells you that you must know this thing. And if someone tells you you don't know, then that's to get defensive. So it was just a strange moment that I had never really experienced, where essentially I was being asked not what to do, but how to support myself. And the one thing I could think of, taking into account my own capacity, taking into account my own labor and the fact that it's not my job to teach white people this, the first thing that immediately came to my mind was be teachable, because so many people are just not teachable. And taking the impetus to learn self-directed. And, you know, I know that's hard. Festival working is probably one of the most exploitative forms of the labor in the film industry. It's like we're on marathon time, essentially. And it's like, well, where can I make time for my anti-racist education? But I mean, that really has to be something that you prioritize as importantly as your own kind of other work, you know. Can you remind me one more time of the last part of your question? Sorry.
No, it was just I was interested in your reflection with regards to, you know, how the system keeps centering and keeps, you know, how can we move it forward, and also how do you think how can we do this inroads, right? And the accountability part, how can we hold accountable a whole industry that has, you know, so many white people trying to center in a way.
I think also
so many white men also, right?
Once again,
they keep centering.
We have to center those who are being the most marginalized and the most oppressed. And especially when I find myself speaking about anti-racism or specifically anti-Blackness on kind of really international panels such as this, I think it's a great reminder that while my experience of anti-Black racism is worth talking about, and while my language and our North American language around that is obviously worth talking about, it's going to look different for every kind of region or country. You know, to be Black in America, to be Black in Canada is not the same as being Black in Russia. It's not the same as being Black anywhere else. At the end of the day, the thing that underpins our experience is anti-Blackness and white supremacy. But, you know, for folks, particularly in Europe, given the panel that we're on right now, I think turn your gaze and turn your ears towards the people who are talking, even if you couldn't originally hear them. I bet you $1 million they've been speaking, you know, and see what their demands are, see what their thoughts are, see what their experiences are, see what their truths are. Because so far, a lot of what I'm seeing is a bunch of white people in a room trying to come to a solution, but that's not really how it works. You know, you have to give up your seat. And I think that's something that a lot of white people don't want to come to grips with, is that they have to give up their seat. It can't be, you come with us and we harm you while you're here. It has to be, this is now yours, or here are the funds to start your own thing, you know?
I think if I can add to that,
yes.
in many cases, it's sometimes even the case, to connect to what you just said, Saratai, that in many cases in Europe, people think, okay, so we become aware of the fact that actually racism is a problem. So let's come up with a solution. Let's sit together and find a solution. And people not even being aware that actually all in the room are white. And I think that's quite symptomatic. And I must completely admit that I'm one of those people until a couple of months ago that actually didn't even realize sometimes that we were trying to figure out something without actually asking or inviting people into that conversation that actually are seeing things from a different side. And I think, you know, these are steps, and that awareness and those mistakes that you make are steps to at least to acknowledge, but also to learn from. But too often, and one example is also, I think, a big announcement a couple of months ago, obviously straight after the George Floyd murder and the whole backlash of that, so to say, on world politics, that the European Union, the Commission of the European Union said, okay, like Europe needs to look at racism and find policies for anti-racism, and then basically saying that they're going to do that with commissioners that are all completely white, and nobody else is being invited basically to those talks. That's at least what it looked like. And I think these kind of things are so obvious that we should be able to tell our leaders as well, if we're not the leaders ourselves, to say, listen, great initiatives, but please be aware that this conversation should and has to be done in another way, and otherwise it's not valid.
Yes. on that note, Nada, did you? I saw you nodding. I'm interested in your reflection, and of course, if Maria has a reflection on this, I would like to invite you both to reflect.
Yeah, I think what Sarate was saying about who's welcome in the room kind of resonates with me so much. And again, like, yeah, it's like there is something that I constantly feel when when a festival or a program kind of approaches me and says like, we're handling diversity, so you're in. And for me, there is some sort of superiority to it a lot of the time, like oh, you're finally invited to be part of the conversation. And it is like in many ways it is good, and in other ways it's actually not helpful and in some way rude. Like I can give a couple of examples. I think in 2013, like with the refugee crisis coming up, I was working with a lot of refugees, so I was being sent emails all the time to develop films about refugees. And I was, in a way, quite offended by it because I'm not a refugee and I don't have the right to represent that cause. And it's not just about inviting, like making a slot for the topic. It's about actually listening to a different perspective. And that perspective is not simply a perspective of someone living in the Middle East. It needs to be the perspective of someone who knows that reality. And yeah, so that's one example. I think it got a little bit better when a few festivals were like focusing on like how to empower directors from the MENA region or from the South. And to be honest, like I've attended a few programs that were very, very helpful and useful to me and my career. And I've attended others where I thought most of the feedback was completely about how to make a film about a topic that you're interested in, but for a European audience. And this is, again, not how you create a diverse, open space. And
come and become like me. That's what they were saying to you. Come over here and be like me. Yes. In order for me to accept you, you have to be like me.
Yeah. And I kind of only I think I only start a conversation with someone who is at least with me on the same level, that there is a huge problem and that we're gonna try to figure this out together. But I don't really engage with people who want to make me a check on a box. Like this is not really going to help anyone in my society, in my situation, or in the world.
Maria, if you have any comment, I'll take your comment, of course, and then I want to jump into the Q&A because there are so many questions coming up my way. I'm already dreading that I'm not going to be able to go through them.
Я согласна с тем, что вы сказали про убежище беженцев, потому что я, в принципе, сама сталкивалась с такой ситуацией, когда меня как звали как вот цветного представителя что-то сказать про защиту мигрантов, но в то же время я не являюсь трудовым мигрантом, и я не могу как бы отбирать у них право голоса.
Yeah, Masha agrees with Nadia because there were situations when she was invited to speak about labor immigrants from the Middle Asia. Yeah, but she's not a labor immigrant from the Middle Asia, and she didn't understand why she was invited to speak about their problems. And she thinks that she can't represent their voices, yeah, when she speaks about their problems, yeah. So it's kind of like the same situation with refugees, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that shows who's centering the conversation most of the times, right? This idea of come close to me and become me, so yeah, I can understand. I can put you in the box. I have you from before. Right? If you are from the Middle East, you are you are a refugee, if you are a Black person in Russia, you probably are certain other things that the bias has informed.
В общем, говорит о ситуации о том, что тот, кто тебя зовет, не различает эти группы.
Да, потому что фактически единственный инфлюенсер, который пишет о расизме в России, крупный инфлюенсер.
Yes, it's like that because Masha is probably the only famous blogger who writes about racism in Russia, so that's why she is invited, and people don't think about others who can say about these problems. Yeah.
Great. I will jump into the questions. There are so many great questions, I have to say. All right, let's see how we dive into this. Okay, so Saratai, I'm going to give you this one because, of course, it relates to exhibition spaces. And it says, how important are independent exhibition spaces to fostering an anti-racist cinema culture? Do you think investment in theatrical nonprofit organizations is one good strategy?
Hi, Kevin. I know the person who asked this question.
Okay,
I think, as with everything, it really depends on who is there in charge and doing, sorry, I'm rereading the question. Who is in charge there and doing the work? I think for myself, with my own programming in independent exhibition spaces, it has allowed me a lot more space than non-independent spaces. I think also mine is a special case where the cinema that I program for is not a not-profit. It's a privately owned business. So it's a bit of a different structure than most other people work in, and it's certainly different from any other structure or festival or any other experience of programming I have, and I'm really grateful for it. But I do think that the answer perhaps doesn't lie in different kinds of spaces, but more so different kinds of thinking and different kinds of I don't want to say mandating that thinking, but collectivizing it. Because certainly harm is capable at any level. You can see just, you know, a lot of the charges held up against some of the Black Lives Matter chapters in the States and here, where, you know, it doesn't matter the level of the organization or the intent of the organization, harm still finds its way in. And it's more about what people do once a harm has occurred, you know? I definitely don't think nonprofit organizations are a good strategy. Myself having just come from one, which was a really kind of horrible experience. I'm very grateful for the work that I was able to do there, but it came with a cost. And I know that, especially in Canada, a lot of our reckoning right now with public institutions has been with nonprofit organizations and the ways in which that specifically nonprofit structure facilitates and enables a lot of racism and a lot of anti-Blackness. You know, it's one of those either or thinkings where you think corporate or not-for-profit, like one must be evil, one must be good, kind of like how Canada doesn't think it's racist because America's so racist, like, but that's not really how it works. So I don't think a change in space is really going to do it. I do think that there are obviously benefits of collectively organizing, of collective kind of power structures rather than hierarchical power structures. There are benefits to all of those things which historically have proven to center the voices of those most often not heard, but at the same time, you know, racism and anti-Blackness, it lives in all of us, and it's less about trying to cast it out, although obviously you want to, and more about what do we do once it's harmed someone. Because I think one of the things that's become more clear to me over time is that and I'm speaking specifically to my background here in Canada, what a lot of fellow Black Canadians are feeling is not something that's new. It's something that's happened to Black Canadians in the arts before us, but that doesn't mean it hurts any less. So, you know, I guess that's my answer.
That's a good answer. I think you tap into a lot of those angles there from knowing from within. There is another one here about Eastern Europe. Who would like to take it? It's the question probably now, but why do you think there is such a gigantic push against political correctness in Eastern Europe, considering that anti-racism and feminism are still, unfortunately, relatively marginal semi-underground, especially so in the film industry. Who wants to talk about Eastern Europe and why there is such a big push? Maria, Nada, Matis.
It's hard for me to say something about it because, you know, I'm aware of the fact that within Eastern Europe, the answer is very often, well, it's a problem that our society is really dealing with. It's more a Western European problem. I must admit that I don't know exactly the answer to it and why that is and why that answer is coming and why it seems to be a problem that is not being accepted. In a way, statistically, I think, yes, there is differences between Western Europe and the presence, but also the history, I would say, when you look at colonialism and so on. Obviously, that is a more Western European historical issue. So I don't really know the answer to the question, but I think it's a very, very interesting and a very important question to be able to answer. And that's also something I think we should delve more into. The same is that I'm actually quite curious also how this panel, being part of the Sarajevo program, how this is being seen and received within the region. And I'm actually quite curious also to have feedback after that or read about it later on.
Yes,
So
I guess the questions can also reflect a bit of some of the intrigues or demands of knowledge that people are having. Maria or Nada, do you want to comment on that? Maria, yes.
Можно сказать, что, в принципе, у нас очень однобоко подаются новости, и даже для молодого поколения многие вырастают расистами именно из-за того, что они вот видят какие-то новости, вот как с примерами, которые встали на колени.
Okay, the problem, for example, in Russia, which is a part of Eastern Europe, is that, for example, our news on television or in the internet, they translate only one side of a problem, so they don't represent voices from different groups, only from, I guess, one main group. Yeah, and as an example, Masha talked about news where white people stand on their knee in USA during during recent situations with George Floyd's death, and one of main news communities in Russian social networks, they said that only white people stand on their knee, on their knees, but that wasn't true. And the problem was that these newsmakers just wanted to hype, but that leads to aggression from most of white Russian people. Yeah.
Также, если говорить про рекламу, например, ну вот или просто про какую-то вот киноиндустрию и так далее, у нас нет репрезентации других национальностей, кроме русских.
Yeah, and if we speak, for example, about films and movies, all different nationalities in Russia, except Russians, are not represented there. I mean, in films and movies, while we have around 200 different nationalities in Russia, but they're not represented anywhere.
Мы никогда не увидим в какой-то рекламе майонеза счастливую семью кавказцев или бурятов или ну, то есть что-то такое конкретное.
Yeah, and for example, in advertisements about different products, we can never see, for example, Caucasian family. Yeah.
Caucasian is not race in Russia.
Yeah, it's not race. It's
nationality.
Ethnic nationality or an ethnic group from.
It's Russian black.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, the things that we don't know, right? Nada, any comments? I will move on actually to the question. Sorry about that. I'll move to another question. And somebody is saying here, oops, the questions are gone. No, they're here. How do we begin to move towards a cinema that recognizes racial minorities in historically white majority countries? I'm an Asian American filmmaker, and while I'm excited for the international success of a film like Parasite, I do notice that film institutions seem more comfortable programming and promoting films by non-white filmmakers from countries in which they are part of the racial majority or racially homogeneous countries, rather than racial minorities from their own countries. I imagine this is also a pressure that non-white European filmmakers also feel. So the question here is, how do we begin to move towards a cinema that recognizes racial minorities in historically white majority countries? Nada, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think one of the answer could be the audience itself, like who is watching the films again. And yeah, I do think that we're quite used to the certain formats and certain stories about certain races, even within like European contexts. And I think that the fight of form and of audience could be one way to look at this. And again, like with all these initiatives around that work around diversity in films, I do agree with what you said, Paula, that accountability is a big question. Like, are these initiatives, are these changes that are coming supposedly from within the system accountable to these minorities in these countries? How can they be accountable to them and not to how things have always been working?
Thank you. I have another one from Jeff Banis. Says, I'm Jeff, a black writer. He says he's black in the next paragraph, so I'm incorporating. A black writer of TV drama in London. I wonder how the panel responds to the very recent report on film here in the UK, which showed that racism is seldom represented on screen. Gender issues are actually twice as likely to commissioned as one as about race. We are finding that outside of some limited progress on gender, other disadvantaged groups are simply locked out. Your thoughts? Sarah, do you have any comment on that? Is putting gender and black?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes we forget what the function of cinema is, like the cultural function of cinema is. It's, you know, to disseminate information, it's to see ourselves, see our stories, to see other people's stories, to see, you know, just a myriad of things that work so much deeper on our collective psyches than just a good movie or a bad movie or form or formal qualities. But, you know, I think it's just a very obvious situation where if those stories were allowed carte blanche on screen, a lot of people would have to reckon with the fact that they themselves have been a part of this culture of harming racialized folks. You know, I think there's a real reason why silencing folks who have been harmed works a lot, and we saw this a lot with, you know, maybe Me Too happening, where those stories, it was safer for these stories to make their way to the screen because we have kind of punctured the bubble of talking about it. And even then, it was a very specific moment that mostly put forward the experience of white women. But I think with racism, it's harder, you know, because it's again like that thing about the white ego, these narratives that white people tell themselves of, oh, I'm not racist, I could never do that. Well, what is that person going to do when they see themselves on screen doing exactly what they've done in the past that was anti-Black or racist or violent in some way? And it's, you know, it's just the way, specifically for us Black folks, the way in which cinema has reproduced a world in which we don't exist, you know, or we exist as tokens, or we exist as stereotypes, or within that we exist to forward whiteness, to forward white culture, to forward white people's imagination of themselves. And I think, you know, outside of diversity and inclusion initiatives, which I know the UK, no comment. That's all I got.
No comment.
not my country. I can't do more than one country.
Well, it is mine, but for 21 years now,
you know,
I'm not going to comment either. But, yes.
But it's like at the end of the day, it is a way of reproducing us, or better yet, not reproducing us as a part of the white imagination, which is essentially what a lot of film is, you know. So as per the advent of cinema itself, where, you know, the mechanical functions of cinema was literally to erase darker skinned people. We're not supposed to be there, therefore we aren't, you know. And obviously that's changed a bit since 1879 or whatever, you know, the French got started on their cool thing called film. But it doesn't mean it's better. You know, so that's my long meandering answer.
No, it's a good answer. And for those folks who want to actually know more about the UK, I will post in the chat a great work that somebody did about This Is Not Our Work. This is not our work, and it's a long essay that is really useful. It's not that I don't want to talk about it, otherwise it looks like we created a panel about something I don't want to talk. I just don't want to center. Is there a danger of having radical Black anti-colonial aesthetics assimilated within a classical white cinematic style to depoliticize aesthetics in a sense in order to achieve wide mainstream viewership? Nada. Can we say something about that? A danger of having a radical Black anti-colonial aesthetic assimilated within a classical white cinematic style? Is there a danger on that?
Yeah. Can you actually
depoliticize aesthetics? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing with aesthetics in general. I think I keep talking about form itself and how stereotypical narratives are dominant in general. But I do not believe that radical Black aesthetics also are a valid thing. I don't think aesthetics is just limited to a certain group or a certain minority. I do think that this is also this could be a bit of part of what is problematic about the conversations. It's because a Middle Eastern person can make an action film. There were
absolutely.
Yes, and a woman can make a horror film, and I think just by taking genre and aesthetics to be identified with certain race or a group is actually part of the problem, because again, and I think I might sound mean at this moment, but a lot of the time when I'm proposing a certain cinematic style or talking about it, somebody would say, but that's too French. And I'm like, yeah, you don't own it. You don't own the style. You don't own that language. It's cinema, it's free. And I'm supposed to be interpreting my film my way. And I do believe that just these associations between what a certain type of style or aesthetic is associated to a race or a dominant group is part of the problem. It's because people do not think they have the right to use it, and they do.
It's a really good point. I'm very aware we are 4 minutes over the time. I don't know. I'm very torn about putting some more questions. Should we give some 5 minutes to see if we go through the questions? There are 4 more questions. Are you all okay if we do that? All right. So thank you, everyone. In Europe, we have a problem of representation in all film crew positions below and above the line. What is a respectful and smooth way to invite more people to take positions in the film using the little power we have as producers? As producers, we have a lot of power to hire crew. And so above and below the line, you just put the call out there, and you just really make sure that you interview people, and you really make sure that you see people, and that you really make sure that within that concept of what is the best person to do the job. You incorporate all your biases and you go through the whole thing one time and time again until you really have a crew and above and below the line that reflects the world that you really want to see if you're really serious about anti-racism. That's going to be my 2 cents on this. I do think a producer has a lot of power on that. Nada, you're my other producer in the panel.
Yeah, I think for me, it's about also choosing films that I want to put out there in the world, like which kind of stories and which filmmakers that I want to support and I want to see the work out there. So I think one of the most important thing is to keep your eyes open and to look for films where they're not only normally supposed to be, like not only in the big festivals and not only names that have been made, but also people who do not necessarily have the same privilege to be in the spaces that you are, and to be respectful of their choices and what they want to make as a film.
Great.
I think that a lot of white folks who are trying to engage in anti-racist education and action, I know this from knowing white people personally. As for my experience knowing white people, I know that a lot of these sort of questions are bound up in anxieties around doing something wrong. And in its best case, it is a really good time for self-reflection and self-critical thought. But in the worst case, which is kind of like the more popular end game that happens with these sort of anxieties, is that they kind of collect into discourse. And it's like people have forgotten the action that was supposed to happen. So, I think it is a very scary kind of thing to put yourself out there. I will say that as a white person and publicly declare yourself as to be a white person who will not ally themselves with white supremacy. That's very scary, but you just got to do it. Don't overthink it. Just get in there. Just do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just put This Work Isn't For Us, written by Gemma Desai. She's a writer, curator, and is a very, very long analysis of the UK specifically. So anyone interested, I do want to talk, and it's kind of there, what I want to say. Matthias, I want to send this all over to you. As a white filmmaker, I want to write diverse characters, but I don't want to fall into tokenistic representations of races different to my own. Any tips on navigating this?
Yeah, I think that's actually a question that I've heard quite a lot in the past couple of weeks, when people said like, well, I'd love to have, if the thing is that there is no visibility of BIPOC characters, for example, in films, I'm happy to write films in which that's the case, which I think is a very noble intention, but I think it doesn't just start with, in this case, white writers, directors, even producers saying, listen, okay, let's actively go and search, but also to listen and search for people and actually see where to find them, what those stories might be, what might be interesting things to do, where there have been experiences in doing that, which went well, which went wrong, and so on. So I think the conversation, to make it a short answer, to reach out to people, Black, Indigenous, people of color, to see how this can be done in the right way. I think that is where it starts to create new content. And that's also, I think, creates most of all content that is not just making BIPOC people visible in films, but make them visible in an interesting way. And that's not a decision that can be taken or be done by, I think, white people, but it can be done in collaboration with BIPOC people, and not just because white people decide that they're going to grant BIPOC people to be part of their stories. So yeah, I think starting to talk, discussing and reaching out and working together with BIPOC people and make them part of your teams. I think that's the right way to start working in at least to it can be a first start that will create more interesting stories, I think.
Thank you. Well, Sarah, you want to add something to that?
Just a little thing. I think as someone also who gets, I think within an international context, some of what I do in terms of work gets a little lost. So I actually do get a lot of inquiries from white filmmakers to ask about production things, which I know nothing about. I don't know how to make a film. I have no idea. I once knew it in school and I forgot it. And now I just know how to curate and program and talk about and critique films. But the one thing that I do want to kind of say as a reminder within this is be sure if you still think you're the right person to tell the story, which you are probably not, which is not a personal thing, it just is the case. If you're still going forward with this and this kind of collaboration that Matthias was talking about, please pay the person you collaborate with. You know, it's not enough to just message someone, and this is kind of what I was talking about, happens to me a lot, white filmmakers being like, how do I do this, how do I do this? And it's like, that is a labor, you know. My expertise as a Black person doesn't come for free just because a white person has good intentions. So I would say see it as any kind of collaboration. If you had someone on set to consult you on technical things, if you had someone on set to consult with costume, whatever, it's definitely not the same work, but it is work and it needs to be compensated as such.
Absolutely. And on that note, I am so aware we are over the time. I just want to thank you all for being here, for being so generous. I think the mantra for this is radical support or nothing. Ask yourself if you are the right person to tell that story, for sure. If you're not, it may not be you. And that, as Sarah was saying, as Artai was saying, it's fine. If we want to be part of the change, that is exactly what we need to think. So if you work for or are supported by any institution that is organization or group that is white-led and is powerful, if your role in this ecosystem is being shaped and or provides opportunities and that brings you to occupy spaces and resources yourself, and because those organizations put you in the front, ask yourself if the space you're occupying is yours to claim, or if you could support another person who is not in your privileged position and bring them while you take a sidestep. That will be my summarizing of this. I think this is, if we all did that, probably this industry would kind of push forward into this really needed change and seeing a bit of the dismantling of this white supremacy centering and vision of the world. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. I have the last talk, and we're going to talk about gatekeeping and film festivals and film reviewers, different voices that actually are also part of this change. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you had a good time, and I'm sorry we went a bit late. Thank you.